For 29 years, I made a living predicting disasters, yet I never saw the one growing inside my own home. The phone rang just before midnight, delivering a trembling voice that shattered my retirement. My son had left his wife in the dark woods. I grabbed my flashlight and keys, unaware that a stranger in the shadows had already recorded his cruelty. My name is Evelyn McAllister, and I have lived in the riverside town of Graybridge, Pennsylvania, for 57 years, until last week. My life was defined by rigid structure. I had just retired from the North Line Compliance Bureau after 29 years of risk control. My job was to look at chaotic spreadsheets, identify the fracture points, and predict where the collapse would happen. I thought retirement would mean turning off that part of my brain. But I was wrong. The biggest risk was not in a corporate ledger. It was sitting at my own dinner table. The call came at 11:45 at night. It was not a number I recognized. I answered it with the annoyance of someone who had just drifted into a fragile sleep. Hello? The only sound on the other end was heavy, jagged breathing. It sounded like someone trying to keep their lungs from failing. Then, a voice that was barely a whisper spoke. Ms. Lila, she's been left. In the woods. The line went dead before I could ask a single question. My stomach turned over. Lila Hart is my daughter-in-law, 2 years ago. A car accident took away her ability to walk without assistance, leaving her dependent on a walker and a foldable wheelchair. But she is not helpless. She works part-time remotely doing data entry and pays her own bills. She is fierce about her independence. The town gossips like to say she is a burden on my son, Mason, but I know the books. I know who pays for the groceries. I did not call Mason. I grabbed my keys, an old wool coat, and a heavy-duty tactical flashlight. I drove toward the Black Pine Preserve. The rain was coming down in sheets, turning the asphalt into a black mirror. My hands were steady on the wheel. This was not just a mother rushing to help. This was a risk controller assessing a scene. I noted the time. I noted the lack of cars on the road. I prepared myself to document everything because panic is the enemy of evidence. The preserve gate was open. I drove down the gravel path until my headlights cut through the darkness and landed on a small shape huddled at the base of a massive oak tree. I slammed the brakes and ran out. Lila was there. Her clothes were soaked through with mud and rain. Her walker was thrown several feet away, lying on its side like a discarded skeleton. She was shivering so violently that her teeth chattered, but she was clutching her phone to her chest. The screen was smashed at the corner. I draped the coat over her shoulders. Lila, look at me. She looked up. Her eyes were wide, void of tears, filled with a shock that was far worse than crying. Mason. He locked the doors. She whispered, her voice cracking. He locked them, and he turned the car around, like I was just an object he was dropping off at the dump. A twig snapped behind me. I spun around, shining my light into the trees. A man stepped into the halo of the beam. He wore a dark, waterproof jacket and a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. He held his hands up, palms open. I'm not here to hurt anyone, he said. His voice was calm, deep. Name is Jonah Creed. I was just patrolling. He did not look like a ranger. He looked like someone who knew how to disappear. He reached into a pack and pulled out a sealed bottle of water and a foil thermal blanket. He handed them to me, not to Lila, respecting her space. Get her warm, Jonah said. Then he looked me dead in the eye. I saw it. I saw him push the wheelchair out. I have proof. I did not ask him why he was watching. I got Lila into my car, cranking the heater up to high. As I pulled away from the muddy track and back onto the main road, I checked my rearview mirror. Twin headlights appeared in the distance. A dark SUV kept pace with us, staying exactly 3 car lengths behind. I took a sharp right toward the residential district. The SUV slowed down, lingered for a second, and then vanished into the night. It was a professional follow. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. My son had not just made a mistake. He had started a war. By 7 in the morning, the adrenaline had faded, replaced by the sterile hum of the urgent care clinic. The doctor was a young man with tired eyes who noted the bruising on Lila's arms and her low body temperature. He confirmed that her life was not in danger, but she needed rest and observation to ensure shock did not set in. I sat in the hard plastic chair, watching Lila stare at the ceiling. She looked small, stripped of the armor she usually wore to face the world. My phone vibrated against my leg. The screen flashed with the name Mason. I stepped into the hallway, staring at the scuffed linoleum floor before answering. "Mum." His voice was terrifyingly steady, smooth as glass. "Don't make a big deal out of this. Lila. She just had a panic attack. She gets confused." I felt a cold pressure in the center of my chest. He was rewriting reality before the ink was even dry. He spoke with the confidence of a man who believed his own fiction. Confronting him directly was the only option. "You left your wife in a forest without her wheelchair. Why?" The silence on the other end lasted exactly 3 seconds. I counted them. 1, 2, 3. "Are you taking her side?" he asked, his tone shifting instantly from concern to accusation. "You always baby her." I hung up. I did not have the energy to argue with a delusion. I walked back into the room. Lila was awake, her eyes red but dry. She held her cracked phone out to me without a word. It was a screenshot of a text thread from 2 days ago. The recipient was unsaved. I read the message Mason had sent. "I can't do it anymore. She is dead weight. I need to liberate myself so I can actually live again." Dead weight? That was what he called the woman who had supported him through law school. I handed the phone back to her gently. My professional instincts kicked in. If he was discarding her emotionally, he was likely discarding her financially too. I pulled out my tablet and logged into the joint account I had helped them set up years ago. I still had the admin access. The balance was 0. Every cent had been transferred out over the last 48 hours. The recipient was a business entity listed as Apex Strategic Services. It sounded professional, clean, and utterly fake. A quick search showed a mailbox address in a strip mall 2 towns over. My phone rang again. Unknown number. Mrs. McAllister. The deep voice was unmistakable. Jonah Creed. I uploaded the copy of the video to a secure cloud server. The physical drive is buried where no one will find it. "What do you want?" "Mr. Creed," I asked. "I don't want money," he said. "I want the right person, at the right time, to face the right consequences." The name clicked. Jonah Creed. I remembered reading the local papers years ago. He was an investigative journalist who broke a story on municipal corruption and then vanished after a messy, strange defamation lawsuit that destroyed his career. He was not a random hiker. He was a man who knew how systems failed. "Stay close," I said, and ended the call. 2 hours later, we were back at my house. I had just settled Lila into the guest room when the doorbell rang. I checked the camera. It was Mason. He stood on my porch wearing a crisp polo shirt and his best good son smile. He looked like he was ready for Sunday brunch, not like a man who had committed a felony the night before. I opened the door. "Mom?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "God, what a mess. I'm here to take Lila home. She needs her own bed." His eyes did not look at the guest room door. They darted immediately to the kitchen table, where the hospital discharge papers and the invoice for the ambulance sat. He was calculating the cost. I stepped back, opening the door wider. I did not scream. I did not slap him. I fell back on 29 years of training. When a subject lies, you make them comfortable. You let them talk until they hang themselves. "Come in, Mason," I said softly. "I just brewed a fresh pot. Let's have some coffee." I watched him walk into my kitchen. For the first time since the day he was born, I did not see my son. I saw a target. I spread the bank statements across my dining room table, treating them like evidence in a forensic audit. It did not take long to find the anomaly. Buried under generic utility bills and grocery charges was a recurring payment of $2,400. It had been leaving the account on the first of every month for 8 months. The recipient was Lake Mercer Lofts. That was a high-end apartment complex in the city centre, 40 minutes away. Lila sat across from me, her hands wrapped around a warm mug. When I showed her the entry, she did not look surprised. She looked defeated. "I found a parking pass in his jacket once," she whispered, staring into her tea. When I asked him, he told me I was paranoid. He said, "Lila, the stress is making you imagine things." He even tried to make me take Valium. My blood ran cold. That was not just lying. That was systematic psychological dismantling. I needed a weapon. So I called Diane Kerrigan. Diane had been my personal attorney for 15 years. She was a woman who did not smile, did not offer cookies, and did not lose. We met in her office, a room that smelled of old paper and lemon polish. I laid everything out the forest, the video Jonah had, the empty bank account, and the apartment rental. Diane adjusted her glasses, reading the printouts with surgical focus. She finally looked up, her face grim. "Evelyn, stop thinking about this as a bad marriage," she said, her voice sharp. "This isn't just divorce. This is criminal. Abandonment, endangerment, financial fraud." Before I could respond, my phone buzzed. It was Jonah. We met briefly in the parking lot behind the library. He looked tired. I wasn't just walking in the woods. "Evelyn," he said, leaning against his battered truck. "I've been watching Black Pine Preserve for 6 months. There is a pattern. People get into accidents or get scared off right before they sign over land rights." He pulled out a map. The preserve borders the proposed site for the new riverfront development. The main contractor is a shell company owned by the same group as Apex Strategic Services. The pieces clicked together with a sickening sound. The company Mason transferred all their money to was the same company building the development that needed the forest cleared. He was not just stealing from his wife. He was laundering the money back into his own future. When I got home, the landline was ringing. It was Sarah, a former colleague from the North Line Compliance Bureau. "Evelyn, I wasn't sure if I should call," Sarah said, her voice lowered. "But someone called HR yesterday, claiming to be your financial proxy. They asked for a full breakdown of your pension and your death benefits." I hung up the phone and walked straight to the wall, safe in my study. My hands shook slightly as I spun the dial. The heavy door clicked open. The deed to my house was there. My will was there. But the small velvet pouch that held the spare key to the safe was gone. Only one other person knew where I hid that key. I walked back to the living room. Lila was digging through her purse. She pulled out a keychain with a small, nondescript silver USB drive attached to it. I wasn't just sitting at home. "Evelyn?" she said, her voice gaining a hint of steel. I saved every email he thought he deleted. I recorded our arguments. And I found a scan of a power of attorney document on his laptop. The signature looks like mine, but I never signed it. I called Diane back immediately. "He has the spare key to my safe," I told her. "And he's inquiring about my inheritance." "Good," Diane said, and I could practically hear her mind sharpening the blade. "Then we give him exactly what he wants. We are going to set a legal trap. We need to make him believe you are about to transfer everything to him voluntarily. If he thinks he has won, he will get careless." I looked at Lila. She nodded. We were done being victims. We were about to become hunters. I sat in my kitchen with my phone in my hand, staring at the screen until the backlight dimmed. It was time to play the part of the weary, aging mother. I typed the message slowly, ensuring every word sounded like a surrender. "Mason, I am tired. I just want the family to be stable again. Come for dinner on Sunday. Let's talk." He replied in less than 1 minute. "Of course. Mum, I'll be there." The trap was set. The next morning, I went to Diane's office. On her mahogany desk sat a thick stack of documents bound in a blue folder. The cover read, "Revocable Living Trust, Draft." "These are legally worthless right now," Diane said, sliding the folder toward me. "They are just consultation drafts, unsigned, notarized by no one. But to a greedy man, they will look like the keys to the kingdom." I took the folder. It felt heavy. Not with paper, but with intent. Back at the house, Jonah was already working. He was up on a ladder by the front porch, installing a doorbell camera that looked indistinguishable from a standard model. He had also placed a tiny, motion-activated lens inside the cabin of my car, tucked behind the rearview mirror. "Why the car?" I asked, holding the ladder steady. Jonah climbed down, wiping grease from his hands. A man like him returns to where he thinks he has control. He locked Lila in a car once. He will feel comfortable in a vehicle. We need eyes everywhere. Inside. Lila was sitting at the table, reviewing the plan. She looked stronger than she had a few days ago, though her hands still trembled when she held a pen. "Evelyn," she said, looking up at me. "We have to be clear. I don't want to hurt him just to hurt him. No violence, no lies. We use the truth and the law. That is it." "Agreed," I said. "He will destroy himself. We are just providing the rope." My next call was to the regional manager of our local bank. I used my old credentials from the North Line Compliance Bureau to bypass the automated system. I flagged the recent transfers from Mason's joint account as suspicious activity consistent with elder fraud targeting familial assets. It was a partial truth, but enough to trigger a temporary administrative freeze. If Mason tried to move money on Monday, he would hit a wall. Sunday arrived with a grey, overcast sky. Mason walked in at 6 o'clock sharp, holding a bottle of expensive red wine. The house smelled of roast beef and rosemary, the scent of 100 childhood Sundays. "It smells great." "Mom," he said, kissing my cheek. He seemed relaxed, but I saw the tension in his shoulders. We sat down to eat. The conversation was a grotesque pantomime of normalcy. Mason talked about his workload, about how the real estate market was shifting, about how much he missed the way things used to be. He complimented my cooking. He asked if my arthritis was bothering me. "You are still so strong." "Mom," he said, smiling, but his eyes did not stay on me. Every time I looked down at my plate, his gaze drifted over my shoulder to the locked filing cabinet in the corner of the living room. He was counting the assets in his head. I waited until the coffee was served to drop the bait. I let out a long, heavy sigh and rubbed my temples. "I have been thinking," I said, letting my voice trail off into a fragile whisper. "With everything happening, maybe I should arrange the will early, just to be safe." Mason froze. His coffee cup stopped halfway to his mouth. For a split second, the mask slipped, and I saw a flash of pure, predatory hunger in his eyes. He set the cup down slowly. "That might be wise." "Mom, it's a lot of paperwork. Though, you shouldn't handle it alone." He leaned forward, his voice lowering to a confidential tone. "I have a friend, a financial advisor, Grant Rourke. He is brilliant with estate planning. I can bring him by next week to help you get organized." I nodded slowly, pretending to be grateful. "That would be helpful." "Mason?" "Thank you." He was bringing an outsider in. He was escalating. I had him. When he left an hour later, I did not watch him from the window. I went straight to the monitor Jonah had set up in the study. The camera on the porch captured Mason stepping out into the night. He did not look back at the house. He pulled his phone from his pocket and typed a message rapidly. The high-definition lens caught the screen clearly as he hit send. She bit. "Prepare, step 2. I watched my son walk to his car, completely unaware that he had just signed his own confession. Grant Rourke arrived on Tuesday morning, wearing a suit that cost more than my first car, and a smile that did not reach his eyes. He looked polished, efficient, and completely trustworthy. Which was exactly why he was dangerous. 10 minutes before they pulled into my driveway, Diane had sent me a secure text message. She had run a background check on Grant. He had been sued in Ohio 3 years ago for witnessing a forged signature on an insurance payout. He settled out of court. Mason ushered him into my living room with the forced casualness of a man trying to smuggle a bomb through airport security. "Mom, this is Grant," Mason said, placing a hand on the man's shoulder. "He is going to help us get those tax liabilities sorted out. It is just a few simple papers." I played my role. I moved slowly, shuffling my feet as I walked to the dining table. I spent a long time hunting for my reading glasses, patting my pockets and frowning, while I subtly positioned myself in the chair facing the bookshelf. That was exactly where Jonah had aimed the hidden lens. Diane sat to my right, sipping herbal tea, acting like nothing more than a concerned family friend. Grant opened a leather portfolio and slid a single sheet of paper toward me. It was thick, creamy stock. "This is just a standard beneficiary confirmation," Grant said, his voice smooth like oil. "It allows us to shield your assets from unnecessary state taxes. We just need a signature at the bottom." I put my glasses on, tilting my head to catch the light. I saw the pen in his hand, hovering, waiting. Diane leaned forward, her eyes sharp behind her own glasses. "Mr. Rourke, why does this document lack a file reference number, and why is the indemnity clause written in non-standard font?" Grant blinked. He pulled the paper back slightly, his composure cracking for a fraction of a second. "It is a draft, Ms. Kerrigan. We file the numbers after execution. That is not procedure," Diane said flatly. Mason slammed his hand down on the table, The china cups rattled in their saucers. "Mom, just sign it," Mason shouted, his face flushing red. Diane is always suspicious of everything. She's trying to complicate this because she bills by the hour. I looked up at my son. The camera was recording every pixel of his aggression. This was the evidence of coercion we needed. "Mason," I said, keeping my voice trembling but loud enough for the microphone. "What if I don't sign this? What happens then?" Mason leaned down, his face inches from mine. The loving son was gone. "Then you will make everyone suffer," he hissed. "You will ruin everything I have built." The room went dead silent. The air felt heavy, suffocating. Grant cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with Mason's loss of control. He tried to salvage the moment. "Mrs. McAllister, please," Grant said, forcing a smile back onto his face. "We are just trying to secure the equity for the Black Pine project before the fiscal year ends." My heart stopped. Black Pine. He had slipped. That was the name of the nature preserve, the location of the development project that was supposed to be a secret. There was no reason for a personal financial advisor to know that name in relation to my household assets, unless they were already deep in the scheme to sell my land. I looked out the window. A man in a grey electrician's uniform was working on the utility pole across the street. It was Jonah. He tipped his hard hat slightly. He had heard it all. Diane stood up. She did not yell. She simply closed the folder in front of her. "I think we are done here," Diane said. "Evelyn will not be signing anything today. I will review these in my office. Leave. Now." Mason looked like he wanted to scream, but he saw the resolve in Diane's posture. He grabbed his coat. He marched out the front door without saying goodbye. A moment later, I heard the violent slam of a car door, shaking the front window, followed by the squeal of tires peeling out of the driveway. I took a deep breath, taking off my reading glasses. My hands were finally allowed to shake. "We got him," Diane said quietly, but it was not over. Lila walked into the room from the kitchen, her face pale. She held her phone out to me with a trembling hand. "I just got this," she whispered. It was a text message from a blocked number. "If you stay silent, you will get paid." Attached to the message was a photo. It was a picture of the apartment Lila was currently hiding in, taken from the street. Through the window in the photo, you could see the silhouette of Lila sitting in her wheelchair. The photo had been taken less than 5 minutes ago. Jonah laid a topographical map of the town on my kitchen island. He pointed to the shaded area surrounding the Black Pine Preserve. "I have a source on the town council," Jonah said, his voice low. "The development project isn't just about empty land. They need to widen the access road. To do that, they need to clear the properties bordering the forest. They need to clean the area of anyone who might object or slow them down." The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. I went to my laptop and dug deeper into the company structure of the brokerage firm where Mason worked. It was not just a sales job. He was listed as a senior acquisition specialist. His commission structure was not based on selling houses. It was based on acquiring titles for the holding company behind the project. My son was not just a bad husband. He was a corporate cleaner who earned a bonus for every problem he made disappear. And Lila, his disabled wife who required care and refused to sign papers, was a problem. Lila was sitting by the window, staring at the rain. She turned to me, her face pale. "He took me there before," she said softly. 2 weeks ago. He said we needed fresh air. He pushed me down that same trail. I remember he kept checking his phone. He asked me, Lila, do you have any signal here? When I said no, he smiled. I thought he was happy to be disconnected, but he was checking the dead zones. I felt a wave of nausea, but I swallowed it down. I had work to do. I spent the next 48 hours compiling a dossier that would have made my old supervisors at the North Line Compliance Bureau proud. I interviewed the emergency room doctor who treated Lila, securing a sworn affidavit about her hypothermia. I spoke to the neighbours who had heard Mason shouting at Lila days before the incident. I even tracked down a rideshare driver who had dropped Mason off near the preserve entrance 3 nights prior, proof that he had been scouting the location without his car. Diane took this mountain of evidence and filed for an emergency temporary restraining order. She also filed a motion for the preservation of all electronic data on Mason's devices. We were doing everything by the book. Clean, lethal. Mason, however, decided to play dirty. It started on Wednesday morning. My phone began blowing up with notifications. Mason had posted a long, emotional status on his social media profiles. It breaks my heart to see my wife suffering from such severe mental instability. He wrote, "I am trying to get her help, but my mother is enabling her delusions. Please pray for our family as we deal with this crisis." He was painting himself as the victim. He was using the stigma of mental health to discredit the woman he had abandoned. The comments section was full of sympathy for him. "Stay strong. Mason. So sorry you are going through this." I did not comment. I did not engage. I did not post a status update. Instead, I printed out his employment contract and the conflict of interest policy from his own company's website. I drafted a formal letter to the Human Resources Department of his firm. I detailed his connection to the shell company, the fraudulent transfers, and the police report regarding the abandonment of his wife, which directly impacted his moral standing as a licensed broker. I sent it via certified mail. That afternoon, the news broke. Grant Rourke, the financial advisor Mason had brought into my home, had been arrested in Ohio. The warrant was for felony forgery and identity theft. The story was running on the national wire. 10 minutes after the news hit the internet, my phone rang. It was Mason. I put it on speaker. Jonah and Lila stood close. "Mum." His voice was unrecognizable. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a terrified, sugary sweetness. "Mom, listen, I saw the news about Grant. I had no idea. I was duped too. Mom, I am so scared. Can we just talk privately? Just you and me?" He sounded like the little boy who used to scrape his knee and come running to me for a bandage. It was a sound designed to bypass my brain and hit my heart. "I will meet you," I said, my voice flat, "at the Riverlight Diner. 1 hour." I hung up. Jonah stepped in front of me, blocking my path to the door. He looked grim. He is desperate. "Evelyn," Jonah warned. He tried intimidation. He tried social pressure. Now he is going to try the last thing he has left. He is going to weaponize your love for him against you. "I know," I said, picking up my purse. "I am counting on it." The neon sign of the Riverlight Diner flickered against the twilight, buzzing with the sound of a dying insect. Inside, the air smelled of stale coffee and burnt grease. I sat in a booth near the window, my hands folded on the table, watching the door. When Mason walked in, he did not look like the arrogant man who had tried to force me to sign a trust fund document days earlier. He looked like a ghost. His tie was loosened, his shirt was wrinkled, and there were dark, heavy bags under his eyes. He slid into the booth opposite me, exhaling a long, shaky breath. He reached for the menu. Not to read it, but to have something to hold. "Mum," he started, his voice cracking. "You have to listen to me. I got dragged into something outside of my control. I am the victim here." I did not offer him comfort. I did not reach out to hold his hand. I looked at him with the cold precision of a risk assessor looking at a liability. "If you are a victim," I said calmly, "then tell me why you locked the car doors. Tell me why you turned the wheel and drove away while your disabled wife sat in the mud." Mason flinched. He looked around the diner, checking for eavesdroppers. He did not notice the man in the trucker hat sitting 3 booths away, nursing a black coffee. Jonah was there, his phone face down on the table, recording every syllable. "I didn't abandon her," Mason whispered, leaning across the table. "She was hysterical. She was screaming. I just needed her to calm down. I was going to go back. I swear. You waited 3 hours. Mason," I said, "and you didn't call the police. You called a lawyer." He rubbed his face with his hands. "I was scared. I panicked." Then his expression shifted. The panic receded, replaced by the calculating look of a broker trying to close a bad deal. He lowered his voice even further. "Look, we can fix this. If you can get her to drop the restraining order, if you can stop Diane from digging, I can make it right. I will give her $20,000. She can take it and go. She can live wherever she wants. I will let her go, peacefully." He was negotiating his wife's existence like a settlement fee. "And what about the apartment at Lake Mercer Lofts?" I asked. "Does she get to live there? Or is that reserved?" Mason froze. That is just a temporary office. I need a quiet place to work on the merger." I reached into my purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was a printout of his credit card statement. "Since when do you buy organic milk and eggs for an office?" I asked, sliding the paper toward him. "Since when do you pay for residential overnight parking every Tuesday and Thursday?" Mason stared at the paper. His jaw tightened. He realized his narrative was crumbling, so he switched tactics. He decided to attack my heart. "Why are you doing this to me?" he hissed, his eyes welling up with tears that might have even been real. "Do you want me to lose my license? Do you want to destroy my career? I am your son. I want you to act like a man," I said. "I want you to take responsibility." "It is not that simple," he snapped, his voice rising enough that the waitress glanced over. "You don't understand the pressure I am under. The contact on the council is breathing down my neck. If I don't meet the clearance deadline by the 1st of the month, the whole deal collapses. I can't have her dragging me down when I am this close." The world seemed to stop. Clearance deadline. That was not a term used for divorce. That was a term used for construction. It was the language of demolition. He had not abandoned Lila because he was tired of his marriage. He had discarded her because she was an obstacle to a timeline. Her removal was a scheduled item on a project management spreadsheet. I looked at him, and I saw the monster clearly for the first time. "You didn't leave her because you were stressed," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "You left her because you had a deadline." Mason realized what he had said. His eyes went dark. The pitiful boy vanished, and the man who locked car doors in the rain returned. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a menacing growl. "You don't know what you are talking about," he said. "You have no idea what I have done to keep you safe, to keep this house safe. You should be thanking me." It was a threat wrapped in the guise of protection. He was telling me that I was next. I stood up. I placed a $10 bill on the table for my tea. I looked down at the stranger wearing my son's face. You used to be the best thing in my life, I said. But today, I need the truth more than I need hope. I walked out of the diner without looking back. Behind me. Jonah waited 5 seconds, picked up his phone, and followed. We had the confession. Now. We just needed to survive the fallout. Jonah took us to a self-storage facility on the edge of town, a place of corrugated metal and flickering fluorescent lights. He rolled up the door to Unit 402. Inside. The walls were covered in maps, printouts, and timelines. It looked like the inside of a detective's mind, but manic. In the center was a photo of a young man who looked just like Jonah, smiling in a hard hat. That was my brother. Caleb, Jonah said, his voice flat. He was a surveyor for the Black Pine Project. 2 years ago, he refused to sign off on a geological stability report. 3 days later, he fell off a ridge. They called it an accident. I know it was a liquidation. He walked over to a map of the forest. Red pins marked specific locations. I wasn't in the woods that night by chance. Evelyn, Jonah said, turning to face me, I didn't just happen to see your son. I have trail cameras set up all over the perimeter. I knew they were staging disappearances and intimidation tactics to force stubborn landowners to sell. When I saw Mason's car, I thought he was meeting a contact. I didn't know he was dumping his wife. We went back to Diane's office with this new context. The pieces of the financial puzzle finally snapped together. Diane traced the money Mason had stolen. It had gone to a shell company, then filtered through Grant Rourke for processing, and finally landed in an offshore account linked to the development consortium. Grant was just a paper pusher. The real enemy was the entity funding the project. Lila was sitting in the corner of the office, scrolling through her cloud backups on a borrowed laptop. She suddenly went rigid. I remember something, she whispered. Last year, Mason asked me to organize some files for him because his assistant was on leave. I saw an email attachment. I didn't open it then because I trusted him, but I just found the subject line in the trash folder. She turned the laptop around. The subject line read, Household Disposal List. Phase 1. He wasn't just getting rid of me, Lila said, her voice trembling. I was on a list. I leaned in and read the preview text. My breath caught in my throat. My name was there too. Evelyn McAllister. Next to my name was the address of a small, forgotten plot of land I had inherited from my father decades ago. It was scrubland, useless for farming, but it sat right next to the proposed highway extension for the Black Pine Project. The realization hit me like ice water. Mason did not just want a divorce. He needed Lila out of the way so he could claim power of attorney over her, which would give him leverage to pressure me. If Lila was incapacitated or gone, he became the primary decision-maker for their household. He needed to clear the board so he could sell my land out from under me. He was going to sell his mother and his wife to close a real estate deal. We need to strike, I said, looking at Diane. But not just at Mason. We need to take down the whole structure. I can publish the photos, Jonah said, pacing the room. I can put the video of him dumping Lila on every news site in the state by tomorrow morning. No, I commanded. Not yet. If we panic them, they will shred the documents. We need them to believe they are still in control. We need them to think I am a confused old woman and Lila is a helpless victim. I turned to Diane. File the protection order for Lila. Make it loud, but quietly. I want you to submit a whistleblower package to the State Attorney General regarding the zoning fraud and the shell companies. We hit them from the bottom with family court, and we hit them from the top with federal investigation. Lila looked at me. She looked tired, but the fear in her eyes was gone. I don't want to hurt him. Evelyn, she said softly, I don't want revenge. I just want justice. I placed my hand on hers. Sometimes I said, looking at the wall of evidence, justice is just a very clean form of revenge. Mason's career ended on a Thursday morning. The letter from Human Resources must have been the final blow because he cracked. He did not go to his own apartment. Instead, he found the temporary rental where Lila was staying. I do not know how he found the address, but he stood outside her door for 20 minutes, pounding on the wood until the frame shook. He screamed her name, begging and threatening in the same breath. He did not get in. The police arrived in under 5 minutes, enforcing the restraining order Diane had filed. They dragged him away while he was still shouting about his rights. When he could not reach Lila, he turned his sights on me. An hour later, an email landed in my inbox. It was long, rambling, and drenched in performative regret. He claimed he wanted to start over. He asked me to meet him at the entrance of Black Pine Preserve to talk things out, claiming it was a neutral ground where we had good memories. It was a psychological trap. He wanted me back at the scene of the crime, isolated and vulnerable. I showed the email to Jonah. He was peering through the blinds of my living room window. Do not go anywhere near that forest, Jonah said, his voice low and tight. We are being watched. There is a white pickup truck parked at the end of the street. It has been there for 3 nights. Different drivers. They are waiting for a mistake. Diane decided to force the confrontation into a controlled environment. She scheduled a formal mediation at the courthouse. It was a procedural requirement, but it was also a way to get Mason in a room where everything he said would be transcribed. He had to attend if he wanted to mitigate the legal damage. While we prepared, the forensic data from Lila's phone finally finished processing. A technician had recovered deleted messages from the night of the abandonment. One text stood out. It was sent from Mason to Grant Rourke at 11:30 at night. I read the words on the screen, and my blood turned to ice. It is done. She can't move fast. There was no panic in that message. There was no regret. It was a status update on a disposal job. Then came the second blow. A parking attendant from a garage near the preserve contacted us after seeing the news. He had security footage from that evening. We watched the grainy video in silence. It showed Mason opening the trunk of his car. He did not just forget the wheelchair. He deliberately folded it, shoved it under a pile of blankets, and then removed a small bag from the passenger seat. That's my medication bag, Lila said, her hand covering her mouth. He took it out before we left. He knew I would need it. It was premeditated attempted murder by exposure. Mason knew the walls were closing in, so he lashed out. He hired a new attorney, a man known for scorched earth tactics. They filed a countersuit that afternoon. The filing accused me of using undue matriarchal influence to brainwash Lila and accused Lila of fabricating the event to extort money from a high-net-worth individual. They were trying to spin the narrative, painting Mason as a successful man victimized by greedy women. The violence spilled over into the streets that evening. Jonah was walking to his car when 2 men in hoodies shoved him into an alley. They didn't beat him severely, but they snatched his phone and smashed his camera against the pavement before running off. Jonah stumbled into my kitchen 20 minutes later, bleeding from a cut on his lip. "Are you okay?" I asked, rushing to get the first aid kit. Jonah laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "I am fine. They took the phone. They think they won, but I uploaded everything to the secure server an hour ago. I printed a hard copy for Diane, too. He looked at me, his eyes burning with a fierce intensity. They are scared. Evelyn. They are trying to blind us before the hearing. I tightened the bandage on his arm. I thought about the white truck. I thought about the text message. I thought about my son folding a wheelchair so his wife could not escape the cold. No more hiding, I said, standing up. We are not settling. We are going to the hearing tomorrow. It will be a war in there, Jonah warned. They will try to tear you apart. If he wants a war, I said, grabbing my coat, then I will bring the light right into the middle of the courtroom. The county courthouse smelled of floor wax and old timber. It was a place designed to make you feel small. But as I walked down the aisle, I felt taller than I had in years. Mason sat at the defense table. He looked immaculate. His suit was pressed. His hair was perfect. And he wore the expression of a grieving husband who had been misunderstood. He was playing the role of his life. The hearing began with his lawyer attacking Leela. He tried to paint a picture of a woman who was mentally unstable, claiming she had demanded to be let out of the car in a fit of rage. Mrs. Hart McAllister simply walked away into the trees, the lawyer said, gesturing wildly. Diane did not even look up from her notes. She simply stood and presented a thick file. Your Honor? Diane said, her voice cutting through the air like a knife. This is a certified medical assessment from the State Rehabilitation Center. My client has a spinal injury that limits her unassisted mobility to less than 6 feet on a flat surface. The idea that she could navigate a muddy forest floor in the rain without her walker is not just unlikely, it is physically impossible. The judge, a stern woman with grey hair, looked at the defense lawyer over her glasses. The lawyer sat down. Then, it was my turn. I took the stand. I did not cry. I did not tremble. I recounted the phone call, the drive, and the moment I found Lila shivering in the mud. The courtroom was silent. Then came the first shock. Jonah Creed walked through the doors. He was not on the initial witness list, but Diane had filed a special motion to admit new evidence. Jonah plugged a drive into the court system. The screen on the wall flickered to life. It was the raw footage from the forest, complete with time and location metadata. The audio was crisp. We heard the car door slam. We heard Lila begging, and then we heard Mason's voice, clear as a bell. Don't call my mum. You are out of tricks. Mason went pale. But Diane was not done. She projected a flowchart onto the screen. It showed the money leaving Mason's account, passing through Grant Rourke, and landing in the accounts of the Black Pine development firm. This was not a marital dispute, Diane stated. This was a liquidation of assets to satisfy a business deal. The judge leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. Counsel, are you suggesting fraud? I am suggesting conspiracy to commit fraud and endangerment, Diane replied. Before Mason's lawyer could object, the bailiff brought in our final witness. It was the parking attendant from the garage. He swore an oath and looked straight at Mason. I saw him, the attendant said. He didn't forget the wheelchair. He took it apart and hid it under a blanket in the trunk. Then he took a bag of medicine out of the passenger seat and locked it in the glove box. He checked it twice. That was the nail in the coffin. It was not a mistake. It was a plan. Mason snapped. He stood up, knocking his chair over. His face was twisted in a snarl I had never seen before. You ungrateful old hag. he screamed at me, pointing a shaking finger. I did everything for this family. You are ruining us. The judge slammed her gavel down. But the damage was done. Mason had shown his true face. Sit down, Mr. McAllister, the judge ordered. One more outburst, and I will hold you in contempt. I have one final piece of evidence, I said, pulling the small recorder from my purse. I pressed play. The sound of the Riverlight Diner filled the room. Mason's voice echoed off the walls. I have a clearance deadline. You don't know what I have done to keep you safe. The implication of a threat was undeniable. The judge listened to the entire tape. When it ended, she looked at Mason with pure disgust. Mr. McAllister, the judge said, her voice leaving no room for argument. I am granting a permanent protective order for both Lila Hart and Evelyn McAllister. Furthermore, due to the evidence of financial fraud and premeditated endangerment presented today, I am referring this entire file to the district attorney for immediate criminal investigation regarding the Black Pine project. 2 bailiffs stepped forward. Mason looked at them, then at me. He held out his hands as the handcuffs clicked into place. He looked terrified, like a child waking up from a nightmare. Mom. He whined, his voice breaking. Mom, please, don't let them do this. You are destroying my life. I stood up and walked to the railing. I looked at the man I had raised, the man I had loved more than my own breath, and I felt a heavy, final peace. I didn't break your life, Mason, I said softly. You broke it the moment you chose to leave someone weaker than you in the dark. I turned around and walked out of the courtroom with Lila and Jonah. We stepped into the sunlight, and for the first time in a long time, the air felt clean. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please drop a comment below, sharing your city or country so we can all connect. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to subscribe to Grandma's Family Diary. Hit that like button and smash the hype button to help this story reach even more people.